Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love the watches you see today, everything is for sale. Reach out to me, Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing questions. We buy what we sell what we buy. We are always looking to build inventory. Sell us a watch or an entire collection. No upper limit on value paid. We will buy everything you've got. We make it fast, easy. We guide you through the process. And if you wish to trade, we also love to trade. We can often give you a better value on a trade than on a straight sale. To buy, trade, or sell, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. So let's get started with the second generation of the Omega Speedmaster 57. This watch, now manual wind, is considerably thinner in profile, 40.5 millimeters in diameter. It's a little bit smaller than the original. Still stainless steel, still a handsome 1957 inspired look. It derives a lot of its details of dial and case from the 1957 CK 2915, which was the first Speedmaster. It's got a lovely granular maroon dial, maybe burgundy, a little bit of a wine silt look. We have a triple register chronograph that looks like a twin register because we have coaxial chronograph hour and minute hands over at 3 o'clock. Broad arrow style, hour hand right here. You can see that the watch features a hacking seconds function. It also features a time zone function, allowing you to change your locality and your local time zone without disrupting the chronograph or the other time indications. Taking a quick look in profile, the way to best describe the sizing of this watch is to just basically shut my mouth and let the pictures tell the tale. You can see it is considerably thinner and more compact on the wrist. That is downright slim for a modern Omega watch, especially a tri-level coaxial. You can see it's reasonably compact across the wrist, such that I could recommend this watch for a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference or larger. Now on the reverse side, you can see how Omega was able to achieve that thinner profile with the caliber 9906, now a manual wind. It is a manual wind version of the 9900. Let's get a little bit closer, go into the zoom mode. You can see Arabesque Geneva across the bridges. We have anti-magnetic escapement, balance staff, and hairspring. So anti-magnetic to over 15,000 Gauss. We have twin mainspring barrels for a 60-hour power reserve, column wheel and vertical clutch chronograph. You can see the column wheel through the skeletonized bridge. Coaxial escapement. It is a direct and indirect impulse, that is double impulse, tangential contact escapement. So not sliding like a Swiss lever, tangential contact between the impulsed and impulsing surfaces. That's how it improves power reserve, reduces maintenance requirements, and improves chronometry. And of course, this being a master chronometer METAS standard certification, it's tested for chronometry, water resistance, shock resistance, anti-magnetism, and power reserve is a full test of the watch, unlike COSC, which is just a test of the chronometry of the movement. Now, if you want to go a little bit upscale, or maybe a lot upscale, but stick with the full bracelet chronograph look, well, I have a solution here. In the second generation Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Safari, lots to love. The warm Savannah tones of the Safari dial. You can see we have ceramic crown shoulder as well as chronograph pushers. I love the details such as the micro beveling on the chronograph pusher. We have a bezel with classic rounded octagonal form as the original Royal Oak, and thus later Royal Oak Offshore octagonal bezels were inspired by a vintage diving helmet. Just to remove all doubt, we'll do a lume shot so you can see there is lume on this dial. It is luminescent. The watch is 100 meters water resistant, and a big part of what you pay for when you get a Royal Oak or a Royal Oak Offshore is the finishing. One of the reasons you don't get as much of it on most offshores is that they're generally on straps, but here with a full bracelet you get that same degree of differential finish, polish, satin, micro faceting, and detailing that you would get on a standard Royal Oak. We've got a burly double deployment clasp. You can see internally media blasted and satinated with twin trigger release. And this being a second generation Safari, we do have a visible movement on the reverse side. It's the AP caliber 3126, bidirectional automatic winding, 3 Hz beat rate, hacking seconds, quick set date, free sprung balance with a full balance bridge for shock resistance. And of course, we've got the coats of arms of the Audemars and Piguet families on the rotor, reminding you that AP is the oldest Swiss watch brand continuously owned and run by the founding family. families. Taking a look once more on the dial side, you can see we have the Mega Tapisserie dial. It is the large hobnail, tachymeter scale outboard for gauging speed, screw down crown, again 100 meters, water resistant, 50 to 55 hour power reserve. It's a big boy though. On the wrist, you can see this watch, fairly imposing on a 16 centimeter circumference wrist. I could wear this, but especially on the bracelet with the rigidity. You see how I can't pull it straight down out of the lugs? It arcs out and curves a little bit, so it wears large. Think of this as more of a 44 millimeter round watch, and you got the general idea. I could wear this, and a wrist larger than mine could wear this, but if your wrist is smaller than mine, you're going to want to look for smaller options. Fortunately, we've got a couple of them. Starting with a lovely 39 millimeter steel chronograph from Franck Muller. This is the Grail Watch 2, part of a series of watches created in conjunction with Waco and his new company Grail Watch. This is Grail Watch 2, the second in the series. He works with creators, both large brands and small, to create watches that represent their combined vision. And his vision was to revisit the rare Lemagne-powered round case Franck Muller chronographs of the 1990s, which are generally only made in a few dozen copies each and generally shipped to the Italian market. Well, this watch, like the original from the 90s, has a distinct Patek Philippe 1463 aesthetic to it, right down to the rounded chronograph pushers with fluting with the tasti tondi treatment. Of course, symmetrical dial, tri-register. We have little cabochon style hours and Breguet style Arabic numeral 12, a tachymeter scale on the dial like a vintage chronograph, whereas the originals from the 90s would have been about 36 millimeters. This one is 39, so a bit larger. It still wears very traditional, and you'll see it on the wrist in just a moment. Now, on the back side, you could see that they sourced a number of Lemagne 1873 Abauche. So this is basically the same movement in the previous generation of the Moonwatch. And if we want to get really specific, taking a look at the finishing of the bridges as well as the chronograph component, plus the use of a metal chronograph brake, this is almost exactly the same version of the movement used in the display caseback versions of the Moonwatch. So the sapphire sandwich, this would be what Omega would call an 1863. Manual wind, 48-hour power reserve, lateral clutch and cam operation. You can see the Grail Watch logo ghosted on. 3 hertz beat rate, very, very tough, and of course for many years, flight certified by NASA and still used in the line of duty. 50 pieces, individually numbered, a lovely granular center dial in black with tack and hour track to match. Throw it on the wrist, very comfortable, very traditional, not as small as the 90s original, and certainly not as small as a Patek 1463, but a lovely look and a watch that's very viable on both male and female wrists. In that vein, we have a watch that is wonderfully versatile, originally intended as a man's watch back in 1998. Today, the Cartier Tortue mono-pusher chronograph from the CPCP collection is considered extremely hot. The CPCP was the Collection Privée Cartier Paris, and it was a high horology line of Cartier watches that were all crafted using mechanical movements, generally from other Richemont brand companies, like, for example, Jaeger-LeCoultre or Piaget. Well, occasionally, the CPCP line would go outside of the Richemont fold and find a high-end movement suitable for a true high-luxury Cartier by revisiting the famed Tortue mono-pusher case. It was necessary to source a chronograph caliber, and so a company called THA, run by Denis Flageolet and F.P. Journe, later of de Bethune and Montrejorne respectively, they had a movement that Cartier branded the MC045, so column wheel with oscillating pinion lateral clutch, manual wind, 40-hour power reserve, handsomely decorated with the Cartier monogram on the bridges. You could see solarization on the ratchet wheel, screw heads black polished, as well as the crenellated towers of the column wheel black polished. The beveling is quite estimable. You can see that it is mirrored and rounded, executed by hand. These were handmade watches. These are not the quartz ladies' timepieces that dominated the Cartier watch collection at the time. These were designed for the kind of people who would ordinarily be buying Blancpain, Vacheron, Lange, Patek Philippe, and they were designed to stand the test of time, as all of these legacy Cartier case shapes were decades old, even in the 90s when the series debuted. Now, the oscillating pinion is a very smooth lateral clutch mechanism that generally produces considerably less jump than a traditional lateral clutch because the oscillating pinion has less inherent play in it. Let me throw this on the wrist to give you a good sense of it. So we are talking 90s case sizes, though as a non-round watch, it wears a little bit larger. I'd say think of this as a 40 millimeter round watch and you get the general idea. The watch is 43 millimeters from lug to lug and 34 millimeters wide from 9 to 3, not including the crown. A very special watch. Okay, Panerai and Ferrari. We need to look back on this and maybe reassess. After the 10-year run of Ferrari and Girard-Perregaux, there was a lot of skepticism about Panerai, traditionally a tool watchmaker, co-branding with Ferrari, which traditionally served elite clientele with highly refined products. And it's true that it was a shotgun marriage at the time. Not everyone liked the idea or thought it was correct for the Panerai brand, but in hindsight, the watches are all rare. They feature bespoke dials and cases not shared with any other Panerai models, and particularly for event and retailer editions, there are micro series that are extremely exclusive, and that's exactly what we have right here with this Panerai Ferrari Abu Dhabi Grand Prix limited edition of 50 pieces in DLC black and steel. You could see the Ferrari Cavallino on the back, the Scuderia logo, shield on the front, a combination of UAE flag and, of course, UAE destination notation on the back, celebrating the Grand Prix there. The watch features a number of Panerai Ferrari elements, including the tachymeter, the twin register chronograph, and a fascinating crown that takes only 1/4 turn to lock. It gives you 100 meters of water resistance. And so it's a crown system that was exclusive to these models. We'll do a quick lume shot so you can get a sense of the watch in the dark. You can see all three hands on the dial luminescent. The dial in a lovely combination of yellow, red, and black gloss lacquer. It's a big watch, make no mistake, at about 45 millimeters. We'll throw it on my wrist. You can see these also came with bespoke folding clasps, engineered by Officine Panerai for Ferrari. Even the clasps were bespoke to these models. Again, big, 45 millimeters, and it wears large, but it is comfortable and it is fun. And if you like Ferrari, it's always nice to have a nice mechanical Ferrari watch, whether that is Girard-Perregaux, Hublot, Richard Mille, Panerai. There's something that feels right about a mechanical watch in a high-performance car, even if it's not an analog Ferrari, even if you're driving a Portofino M or a Roma, one of the modern computerized cars, something about mechanical just screams luxury and seems like a good match. These watches right now, I'll be honest, they're kind of undervalued. Prices are low, even compared to what they sold for 20 years ago. And the timepieces are generally overlooked by Ferrari collectors and Panerai collectors, which means that they're a great opportunity now. Just as we once took the GP Ferrari watches for granted, those sold for very little money, they were readily available, they were often in dealer cases years after manufacture. I think in time the Panerai Ferrari collection will be looked at as unique, rare, collectible, fun, and yes, desirable. All right. If Panerai was considered to be a tool watch manufacturer, I don't know where that puts Sinn. Maybe arch tool watch manufacturer? Because when I think of tool watches, I think of Sinn of Frankfurt. Famous for their pilot's watches, they're also known for diving timers. That's exactly what we have right here with this EZM2. So this is the Sinn UX GSG9. So GSG, German Special Forces. We have a U-boat steel bracelet and case, over 350 Vickers, significantly harder than standard steel. And then we have Tegament carbon diffused steel on which a hard black coating has been applied. This bezel and its coating nearly indelible, nearly unscratchable. Now what's interesting here is that we have a dial that's actually oil filled. So the UX system uses the hydro technology originally developed for Bell & Ross back in the 90s when Sinn made the Bell & Ross watches from 1992 to 2002. Well, Sinn now makes a version of that watch under its own name, and this spectacular combination of sapphire crystal and oil in the dial means that because they have the exact same index of refraction, you get an absolutely clear, undistorted view of the hands from any angle, which is an unusual and novel feeling as you look at the watch. Because it is also oil-filled, it has a measure of compression resistance, which is how this 44mm sports watch gets a 5,000 meter water resistance rating. We also have a bezel with a wonderfully loud and crunchy action. And in profile, you can see the bezel held onto the case using lateral screws. This is called captive bezel construction, and it means that the bezel is almost impossible to snap off or knock off the case by impact. And that's the benefit of a captive bezel. It's a bit more expensive to make and laborious to assemble and disassemble, but it is much more secure. Inside, we have a high-grade Schwartz. It's what you get when you combine swatch and quartz. May the Schwartz be with you. So you get this 955, which is a high-grade quartz that is extremely tough, extremely reliable, and suitable for a watch like this. Now you see on the back U-boat steel. You may ask how reliable. Typically the 955 is accurate to 5 to 10 seconds per month. Throwing this on the wrist. It's a big watch, but it's wearable, and you can see, again, my wrist 16 centimeters circumference. One of the advantages of this model is because it is quartz, it is extremely thin. And so it sits almost as thin as something like a Rolex Daytona on the wrist, being under 13 millimeters thick. And you can see from lug to lug, no issues maintaining this within the confines of my wrist. And this being a Sinn mission timer, it is incredibly visible by day and visible by luminescence at night. You can see the entirety of that seconds hand has been loomed with an enormous bezel index for easily tracking the passage of time. Now, I normally save the most spectacular or special watch for the finale of the episode, but you can see right here, we're not quite done. This is the penultimate watch, the Romain Gauthier Logical 1. Taking a quick look at the dial, you see grand faux enamel for the sub-seconds as well as the primary dial. You could see the lugs welded on. This is traditional welded lug construction. So the lugs and the case built separately, slotted together, welded, and then all evidence of the removed material reduced by filing to create a super sharp break between lug and case. And you can see that even the recesses of these lugs have been media blasted. We have a concave bezel to visually thin out this 43mm white gold watch. We have a winding trigger over at 9 o'clock. As you press it, it slowly draws the chain around a snail cam, which is visible under my thumb. That snail cam is Romain Gauthier's idea of a modern-day fusee constant force device. So what happens is, as I press the trigger, the chain winds from the barrel to the fusee, and as it discharges, it's got a 46-hour power reserve. The chain pulls on this snail cam, and the effective lever arm pulling the drivetrain, because the fusee cam, or the snail cam fusee is tied to the drivetrain, the force exerted on the drivetrain increases, or the mechanical advantage increases, as the barrel force winds down. So as the barrel loses force, the snail cam begins to expand, and by increasing the effective lever arm, you ensure constant force to the escapement for 46 hours continuously, and then a stop works halts the watch so it won't keep time while losing time. Very modern, with a free-sprung balance of Romain Gauthier's own design and construction. You can see the wheels are also his own fabrications, a recursive wheel within a wheel or circle within a wheel design. And everything is beautifully decorated. Frosted bridges with polished edges and mirror bevels. You can see that the bridge for the fusee system has been rounded and black polished around its center. Each of the jewel sinks has been internally beveled. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and maybe even 2 more, depending on how you count. But these are sharp interior angles where bevels come to an inward cleft, and that's executed on steel, not brass. Steel is very difficult to finish. The fusee system, a beautiful modern take. The real advantage here is it reduces the number of parts compared to a standard fusee and chain, and it keeps the drawing wheel over the barrel in the same plane as the fusee. A traditional fusee is a hyperboloid, so it is a chain that climbs a sort of tiered cone. This is much more efficient. If you look carefully, you can also see that the rollers within the chain are actually individual little ruby pivots, very beautifully detailed. Reverse side, we have a power reserve indicator. We have an open barrel, and though you can't see it, the inside of the barrel is actually lined with sapphire. There's a sapphire over that spring. By lining the barrel with sapphire, Romain Gauthier reduced the amount of friction that would take place inside the barrel. You can see a lovely snailing across features like the bridge for the power reserve and the surround of the barrel. Again, we have frosting on the bridges. We have bevels drawn a mile wide with so many interior angles that it's hard to track them all. You can see Romain Gauthier using proprietary screws that allow for the application of more torque for greater security without stripping out the screw head. We'll throw this watch on my wrist. It is a big watch, made from 2013 to 2021. The logical one is considered to be the definitive Romain Gauthier timepiece and the one that really put his manufacturer in the Vallée du Joux on the map. So what is last? Well, I saved the best for last. A 2022 launch in 42 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. This is the de Bethune DB25 Stradivarius Aerolite. The Aerolite is part of the Stradivarius family, which is named after the Stradivarius instruments, as Denis Flageolet, the watchmaker of de Bethune, reasoned that they are both precision instruments. So this example, smaller than the original DB25 deadbeat second tourbillon, that back in 2011 was 44 millimeters. This is 42. We also have a meteorite dial that's been oxidized, stabilized, and fired to create these spectacular patterns and colors. Note the deadbeat second hand and the fact that this is one of very few de Bethune watches that features a hacking seconds function. We have gold leaf applied to create the distant celestial bodies in the Milky Way, and then the near bodies, the larger stars, you can see they are actually cabochon of gold inserted into slots in the dial. De Bethune makes its own cases, dials, and movements, so all of this is in-house. I've actually been to the manufacturer, and I have seen the large discs of Swedish meteorite from which these individual dial blanks are cut. Flip it over, and it is spectacular. You could see two coaxial 14-karat gold wheels used for the escapement system that underpins the deadbeat second. And then we have a balance of de Bethune's own design, blue titanium with white gold masses in the rim. It is a tourbillon in 30 seconds, so 30-second circuits rather than 1 minute, and it beats at an El Primero style 36,000 vibrations per hour or 10 beats per second. 2 barrels, manual wound. You cannot accidentally overwind them. That's one of the features of that patented system. 4 days of power reserve, silicon escape wheel of de Bethune's own design, and then a flat hairspring that's actually 2 pieces shaped by hand and clamped together, a patented de Bethune hairspring design that breathes concentrically like an overcoil, but is shock resistant and flat like a flat hairspring. You could see that the bridges and the cap over the base plate are black polished steel, and this is a huge expanse of black polish compared to the screws or regulators that you find on standard watches. An immense amount of time and money was spent here. Traditional finishing is alive and well at de Bethune. As you can see, not only do we have that black polish, and I'll remove my fingerprints here, black polish executed by diamond paste, but if you look at the edge of these bridges, you can see that they are broadly mirror beveled in extraordinary fashion. We have a fired blue titanium bridge over the deadbeat second system, and then you can see that the barrels themselves feature solarization. This is an easy watch to wear. Now, 42 millimeters, about 49.7 millimeters lug to lug. It fits on a smaller wrist, and it wears feather light, all in titanium and sapphire. If you ask me who makes the greatest watches in the world, I'll tell you, and I've told you the same answer since 2016, de Bethune, a company that only makes Grail watches, the ultimate in subtlety. Only you and your watchmaker know what lurks beneath that meteorite dial. If you love these watches, reach out to me. I am tmosso at thewatchbox.com for all of your purchase and pricing questions.